You've heard of neuroscience, but what does that actually mean? Are we talking brain scans, microscopes, computer models? Yes, all of the above. I'm Megan Puglia, and in this episode of Unhidden Curriculum, we're zooming out for a bird's eye view of the field. What neuroscience actually is, the kinds of questions different types of neuroscientists ask, and the tools they use to find answers. When a student tells me they want to study neuroscience, my first question is always, awesome, which kind? Cue the blank stares and awkward, what do you mean? So today's episode is here to give you the lay of the land, so you can choose your path with more confidence, or even realize you don't have to choose just one. Let's dive in. At its core, neuroscience is a study of the nervous system, which means the brain, the spinal cord, the neurons, and everything they influence. But the way people study it can vary a lot. Broadly, there are 6 major types or subfields of neuroscience. Cognitive or human neuroscience focuses on how brain activity relates to thoughts, behaviors, emotions, and experiences in humans. Systems neuroscience explores how networks of neurons interact to produce complex functions, often in animals. Cellular and molecular neuroscience zooms in to understand how individual cells and molecules function, interact, and shape brain development or disease. Computational neuroscience uses math and modeling to simulate or predict how the brain works. Behavioral neuroscience studies how the brain influences behavior, often in animals, but sometimes in humans too. And clinical or translational neuroscience bridges lab work and healthcare, aiming to diagnose or treat disorders of the nervous system. Of course, these aren't tidy boxes. There's overlap, gray areas, and subfields on subfields. But knowing the broad strokes can help you decode the jargon, understand why people use certain tools, and figure out which path most excites you. Let's look at what each subfield might ask and how they'd go about answering it. First up is cognitive or human neuroscience. I consider this my primary home. Cognitive neuroscientists study how the brain supports thoughts, behaviors, and emotions, everything from attention and memory to decision-making and language. Our typical tools are things that allow us to see the brain at work, things like EEG, fMRI, eye tracking, and behavioral tasks. We ask questions like, how does the brain process language? What happens in the brain when you're making a risky decision? How do we control our attention or our emotions? Our day-to-day involves designing experiments, running participants through a brain scan, and analyzing data using programming languages like Python or MATLAB. We mostly work with people, not animals. Think brain scans and spreadsheets. Systems neuroscientists study how different parts of the nervous system work together to produce behavior, sensation, and cognition. Instead of focusing on a single neuron or broad brain regions, they want to understand how neural circuits and networks are organized and how they generate behavior. Their tools include things like electrophysiology, optogenetics, calcium imaging, and anatomical tracing. Typical questions are things like, how do different brain regions coordinate to control movement? How do neural circuits process sensory input like vision or sound? What patterns of activity underlie learning or habit formation? You might spend your morning prepping an animal for a neural recording, your afternoon collecting high-resolution data from dozens of brain regions, and your evening debugging analysis code. Many systems neuroscientists work with animal models like rodents or non-human primates, but some also do human work using non-invasive tools like MEG or EEG. Think tangled wiring diagrams and signal processing. Cellular and molecular neuroscientists zoom way in. These neuroscientists study neurons and glia at the molecular level, gene expression, neurotransmitter systems, ion channels, and synaptic connections. The typical tools of a cellular and molecular neuroscientist are things like microscopy, CRISPR, electrophysiology, and biochemistry. Some questions they ask include things like what genes are involved in neurodevelopmental disorders, how do neurons grow, connect, or die, What chemicals are involved in learning and memory? Their day-to-day looks like culturing neurons in a dish, slicing brain tissue, or pipetting in a lab coat for hours. Think tiny things, big discoveries. Computational neuroscientists use math, models, and simulations to understand how the brain works or to predict how it could work. Their tools? Codes, algorithm, neural networks, and modeling software. They use these tools to answer questions like, how can we model the firing of a single neuron or a whole network? What does brain activity tell us about learning or perception? A day in the life here, you'll probably spend more time with data than with people or pipettes. You might build models or run simulations all day. Think coding and equations. Behavioral neuroscience bridges brain and behavior, often using animal models. These researchers explore how the nervous system drives behavior and how behavior changes the brain. The typical tools of this field include things like animal models, lesions, pharmacology, and brain stimulation. And questions include things like how does stress affect memory and what happens in the brain during addiction. If you choose this route, you might spend your days training rats to navigate a maze, administering a drug, or recording neural activity while animals behave. Think levers and mazes. Clinical translational neuroscience is my second home. This is a branch focused on understanding and improving human health. Clinical neuroscientists study brain disorders and diseases, working to translate research into treatments. Our typical tools are neuroimaging, clinical interviews, biomarkers, and diagnostics. Questions in this field include things like, what changes in the brain before symptoms of Alzheimer's appear? How can we improve diagnosis or treatment of depression or epilepsy? We spend our days collaborating with hospitals or clinics, working with patient populations, and managing clinical trials. Think science with direct impact on people's lives. And beyond these, there are even more branches: neuroengineering, neuroeconomics, neuroethics. You get the idea. Neuroscience is a massive umbrella, and no one person can do it all. So what can you actually do with neuroscience training? A lot. Neuroscientists work in academia, tech, healthcare, pharma, government, policy, education, and science communication. Some people use neuroscience as a springboard to medicine or law. You could design experiments, analyze data, build brain-computer interfaces, develop new therapies, advise lawmakers on the ethics of neurotech, you name it. Your day-to-day might involve coding, pipetting, teaching, writing, working with patients, or running rats through a maze. The path you take depends on what lights you up. Do you love working with people, solving puzzles with data, building tools, asking big questions? The field is growing fast, and the demand for people who understand the brain and how to study it is only getting bigger. So whether you're drawn to discovery, healing, advocacy, or invention, neuroscience gives you the tools to make a difference. The field of neuroscience is more like a map than a ladder. There are many routes in and no one single path forward. Each subfield explores a different part of the terrain. The better you understand the landscape, the easier it is for you to choose your direction. In our next episode, we'll zoom in on the tools used in human and cognitive neuroscience, things like EEG, fMRI, and TMS, and how to choose the best one for your study. But until then, keep exploring the map and stay curious.